So we're now on Daf Kuf Daled Omid Beis. Chalas chutzlarts nechelas imazar al shulchan. I can take chalas chutzlarts, invite a non-Kohen, and we can eat from the same table. Hopefully, he's not going to eat from the challah. And the answer is, even if I have to be afraid lest he'll eat from the challah, so what? He's only violating a gzera derabbanan of chalas chutzlarts atu chalas eretz Yisrael v'nitenes l'chol kohen sheyirtze. There's another halacha that chalas chutzlarts he can give to any kohen that he chooses. Normally, we don't want to give challah, let's say challah in Eretz Yisrael, to what's called a kohen ha'ma'aretz. We're afraid that he'll be careless about tumah v'tara, and it's a terrible issur to be metame challah. But in Chutz La'aretz, we were making, and we were so lenient that we said to the balabayis, the one who was mafresh the challah, you know what, Chutz La'aretz, give it to any kohen you want. Let him be the biggest ignoramus on the face of the earth. I couldn't care less, because that's the kula of chalas Chutz La'aretz. And again, in brisket terminology, you would wonder whether chalas Chutz La'aretz is an isa chefza, maybe it's only an isa gavra. Okay, but that's not for us now. Now, just to reiterate Rav Yosef's proof from the Mishnah in Chala that lo gazrina gzera, we don't have one gzera built on another gzera, and then we'll see Abaye says that that's no proof for the question of putting chicken and cheese on the same table, lest he might eat them together, and we're holding now that oaf is only D'Rabbanan. So even in the worst case scenario, if he ate the chicken with the oaf, he would not be violating the Doraisa. Let's just review the logic of Rav Yosef and his diuk from the Mishnah in Chala. The Mishnah in Chala allows putting chalas chutzarts on the same table with a non-Kohen. Why? Because even in the worst case scenario, if the non-Kohen will stretch his hand and eat from the challah, he's only eating challah d'Rabbanan, which itself is a gzera, atu challah d'oraisa, so therefore it's gzera l'gzera. And the Mishnah says we don't mind inviting the non-Kohen to sit at the same table with chalas chutzah. It's Amalei Abaye says to Rav Yosef, this is not a good proof. So let's just introduce the following concept in order to understand what we're about to learn from Abaye's rebuttal of the proof of Rav Yosef. Where is this taking place? When the Mishnah says in Chala that you're allowed to invite the non-Kohen to eat from the same table with the Chalas Chutzarts, where is it happening? Is it happening in Eretz Yisrael? Meaning, I got on an LL plane. Again, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, probably not. But I got an LL plane, and they served me, those, because I don't fly, first class or anything, I business. So they gave me the packaged meal, and there was like a challah roll kind of thing. Inside it says mizonos on it, but don't pay any attention to that. That's not true. It's not mizonos. But so anyway, so I get off the plane. And guess what? I decide, you know what? I can't let the Tayel throw out the thing, so I take it with me. And here in Israel, they're not so makpid on what you bring in. I think in America they're more careful with it. But here, so I bring in this challah. So it's chalas chutz la'aretz. It has the same din of any chalas chutz la'aretz and chutz la'aretz, meaning it's only d'Rabbanan, and I bring it here to Eretz Yisrael. Now, if I invite a non-Kohen to my table here in Eretz Yisrael, I have to be afraid of chalas Eretz Yisrael because I'm here in Eretz Yisrael. But let's have in Chicago. And in Chicago, I'm inviting a Kohen to join me for a meal with chalas chutz la'aretz. So where is the gzera here? What, we're afraid that somebody's going to take chalas Eretz Yisrael and export it from Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to have it on the table here in Chicago? Ridiculous. Such a scenario would never happen. And therefore, if you would have analyzed that Mishnah in Chala and interpreting that the whole case took place in Eretz Yisrael, then I can understand the Ikal and Migzar Mishum Chalas Eretz Doraisa. Then the whole Gzera makes sense that maybe we should be afraid of the possibility that the non-Kohen might eat even Chalas Eretz Yisrael, because what are the chances that here in Eretz Yisrael it's Chalas Chutzah? It's okay, the guy brought it back from El Al on his flight, but you know what I mean? It's very common. And yet, Lo Gazrina, and the Mishnah says you're allowed to invite the non-Kohen, the Zar, to eat with you on the same table with Chalas Chutzah here in Eretz Yisrael, where there's a possibility that maybe he would switch Chalas Chutzah with Chalas Eretz Yisrael. So the Gzera gets off the ground, I can understand it, and yet the Mishnah says Lo Gazrina, then I understand your proof, Rav Yosef, because the Gzera is Shayach, it's a relevant fear, and therefore, why don't we introduce that Gzera? The answer is because it's a Gzera built on top of another Gzera. It's a Gzera l'Gzera. And Ikal Mishma Mino, and now we can make an equation and say that now I can justify why in the case of cheese and chicken on the same table, I could be matir it if I hold that cheese and chicken is only D'Rabbanan, because I don't make one Gzera on top of another Gzera. Ella chutzos, but the Mishnah there in Chala, which you're quoting, is talking about chutzlarts. That's where you're inviting a non-Kohen to eat from your table. Mishum delekel migzar midi. There's no room for Gzera. What are we afraid that from Chalas chutzlarts in Chicago he's going to come to eat Chalas Eretz Yisrael? What's shayach? There's no Chalas Eretz Yisrael in chutzlarts. Aval hocha, but here, maybe I could argue that even if I grant you that chicken with cheese is only D'Rabbanan, I still would prohibit it. Why? Prohibit putting them both on the same table. If the man makes a mistake between oaf and meat, and you're allowing him to eat, or he might come to eat oaf with gvina, he might come to eat osel suki bas gvina. Tomorrow, we upgraded the dinner, and instead of the chef making chicken, he made meat, and then we have a doraisa problem. Mechel bas b'chol doraisa. So here, I can understand that there's a room for Gzera, but don't bring me a Mishnah in Chala where there's no room for Gzera. Maskif le Rav Sheshes. Now this objection of Rav Sheshes goes back to Rav Yosef himself. Rav Yosef was building a whole theory, based on, even if in the worst case scenario, they'll come to eat the oaf together with the cheese, it's only D'Rabbanan. And if it would be that we hold like D'Rabbanan of Rabbi Akiva, that oaf is Doraisa, and it's included in Basar and Gdi, Doraisa for the Isur of Achilus Basar B'cholav, then we could begin to understand the Gzera, Frekt Rav Sheshes, Sof Tzonei B'Tzonei. What are you talking about? What do we have on the table? We've got cold cheese or cold milk. There's nothing heated up over here. By the way, heating up in Basar B'cholav means Yad Soletispo, not Mamish Roteach. It's boiling. So we don't have anything boiling on the table. So what are you going to tell me? Okay, oaf is Doraisa. And we have to be afraid that he'll eat the oaf in one mouthful with the cheese. So what? The Torah doesn't prohibit that. The Torah says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalevimo, and the Isur Achila of Basar B'cholav only applies after Bishul. But to take, let's say, two cold substances, cold meat and cold cheese, and eat it together in one mouthful, the Torah says that's fine. The Torah only prohibited this new entity of Basar B'cholav after cooking it together. So if that be the case, then I don't understand, Rav Yosef, what you're talking about over here. You're saying that I could justify the Gzera if Basar Oaf B'cholav is Doraisa. Even if Basar Oaf I would grant you is Doraisa, we still could not justify the Gzera because Basar Oaf Becholav is dorais. If you cook them together, he's not cooking them together, they're eating from a meal. They're not burning their mouth. Maybe what'll happen is that you know what they'll bring to the table, which has meat and cheese, and according to one man, it has oaf. They're going to bring it in an ilfas. By the way, ilfas has nothing to do with my friend Rabbi Ilson. Okay, that's it. That's just said that false. Anyway, so what's an ilfas? An ilfas is like a hot pan. So what do? You cook things. Let's say you cook meat on the fire in a pot, and then when you bring it out to the table, you bring it out in an ilfas, and it's hot. This reminds me of the fancy catering. You go to a fancy wedding. They have a plate that's hot. The plate itself was heated up, so that keeps the food on the plate hot for a longer period of time. So an ilfas is a hot pan, and therefore, if he comes to eat the meat with the cheese, he's eating hot meat with cheese. Gemara rejects it. That's called a kli sheni. So let's talk for a minute about kli rishon and kli sheni. There's a pot that's on the fire. That's al ha'esh. When you take it off the fire, that's called a kli rishon. When you pour it into a second utensil, that's called a kli sheni. The Torah only prohibits bishul, lo savashel gediva chalevivo, in al ha'esh or kli rishon, but not in kli sheni. The ilfas is a kli sheni. Ukli sheni and a mavashel. By the way, this halacha that kli sheni and a mavashel has to be understood. And you could have a kli sheni that's boiling hot. But the Torah says that's not derech bishul. That's not how we cook things. We don't cook things in a kli sheni. We cook it in the kli, and if we take it off the fire, it's still burning hot in that pot. And that's the normal way you do bishul, but not in a kli sheni. Ella, says the Gemara, we have to just turn a screw a little bit here. Gzeira shema yalab hilfas rishon. What happens is he may take the pot that was on the fire and, he heated up in that hot pan meat. Now he takes the pan and he puts it on the table. Maybe he needs a tripod, I don't know, whatever. But he puts it on the table. That's a kli rishon. That's how far we have to go. So on both sides, listen to what's going on over here, just to, if we take a step back, it's unbelievable how far we went with Basa B'chol. Number one, we said we can't put him on the table together. Number two, we said that he might come to, cook it together. Why is he going to cook it together? Because he brought it out in an ilfas b'kli rishon. La Maisa la Halacha, we don't make any distinctions whether he brought it out in an ilfas kli rishon or not. We're not going to allow any meat and cheese that you're eating off the table. And that leads us here to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. Now, this Mishnah is going to assume that oaf is the Rabbanon, like Rabbi Akiva. Ha'of ole im hagvina al hashulchan v'eino necha. Although we don't eat oaf, right, chicken with cheese, that kuliyamalo pligi is osur, whether it be doraisa, the Rabbanon, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's the Rabbanon. But according to Rabbi Akiva, we're allowed to put cheese and chicken on the same table. However, that premise or that ruling is the subject of a great controversy because that's only divrei Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel omrim lo ola v'lo necha. Not only did the Rabbanan prohibit you from eating chicken with cheese, but you can't even put them on the same table. Again, we see how far we're going. Rabbi Yossi makes an interesting comment here. If you look at it, Zumi Kule Beit Shammai Chumei Beis Hillel. Beit Shammai were more lenient, and they allowed you to put the chicken on the table with the cheese. Beis Hillel prohibited it. That's very rare. And we have a Masechta in Shas called Edios. And in Edios, we calculate how many times out of the myriad numbers of controversies between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai do we find that Beit Shammai are the Mekilim, they're the lenient ones. And I think the Mishnah has a list of 6 cases in all of Shas where Beit Shammai are the Mekilim. But now we have to add another one, says Rabbi Yossi. Now the Gemara is going to have a whole discussion here about what is Rabbi Yossi pointing out of here. I mean, the Tanakama before Rabbi Yossi said this exact thing, that Beit Shammai will permit you to put the cheese and the chicken on the same table, whereas Beis Hillel prohibited. So, like, what is Rabbi Yossi coming to comment on? Let's go on. And we're going to limit this Isser to a table that we're eating from. It doesn't apply to a shmog table. The Ezer Shulchan Amru, do we prohibit dairy and fleishiks on the same table? Because b'shulchan sha'ochanav, we're eating off this table. Aval b'shulchan shesuder olav is a tavshil is no saying zeh b'tzad zeh v'yenu choshesh. By the way, I'm just curious. You gentlemen are from Chicago, correct? Yeah. In Chicago, do they have this minhag that I saw in Memphis, and then I saw it later in Edison, New Jersey, that Shabbos lunch, when you have guests, it's self-service? Do you have that, like a shmor kind of thing? First time I saw it I was a guest in Memphis. So, they told me, Rabbi Bersan, go ahead and take whatever you want from the common, different. Anyway.
Some people do it and some people don't.
Okay.
That's the minhag.
It's becoming more popular, I think, over the course of time.
Here too.
Yeah. I think there's some logic behind it because, instead of everyone grabbing this and that, you go, maybe may require you to wait online a little bit, but you have a lot of choices. They have like 3 different types of chickens and meat and vegetables or whatever. Anyway. Okay. So again, in that case where we're not eating from that table, but everyone's taking to his own table, then you could put meat and cheese on the same table. We go on. Frek the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Hainu Tanakama. What did Rabbi Yossi add to the Tanakama? I mean, it's a simple calculation. Beis Shammai allow you to put the chicken and the cheese on the same table. Maybe there's a machlokas here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. Again, the Gemara is going to reject this, but let's see the according to the Tanakama's presentation, everybody agrees, whether it's Beit Shammai or Beis Hillel, that if you were to eat chicken with cheese, it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan, and the Torah did not include chicken in the definition of Gidi. All machlokas is, okay, Midrabanan, you're not allowed to eat chicken with cheese, but can we put them on the same table? Beit Shammai or Mekil and Omar Le Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says to the Tanakama, Achila Gufa Mikule Beit Shammai Mechumre Beis Hillel. The reason why Beis Hillel prohibit putting cheese and chicken on the same table is because they're afraid you might eat it together and violate a doraisa. Whereas Beit Shammai hold that even if you were to eat the chicken with the cheese, you only are violated D'Rabbanan. Gemara rejects it. But Tanan, we learned in another Mishnah. Where's this Mishnah? In Masechta Edios, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shisha Dvarim. There are 6 cases that are Mikuli Beit Shammai, Umechumrei Beis Hillel. Only 6 out of the myriad machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. 6 cases where Beit Shammai are the Mekilim, they have the lenient position. And this is on the list, namely that according to Beit Shammai, Ola Magvina al Shulchan Veinenecha. So it says explicitly, quoting Beit Shammai, that you can't eat it together. So don't tell me that according to Rabbi Yossi, Beit Shammai would would allow you to eat chicken with meat. That's not so. Rabbi Yossi is quoted and reported as saying that even Beit Shammai hold that you're not allowed to eat chicken and meat. Ubeisil omrim lo olav lo nech. Elo, so now the Gemara says, now here we have a little bit of an agadita, so to speak, a little digression. Man Tanakama, Rabbi Yossi. It's all the same. There's no machlokas here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. So why then did the Mishnah bother adding Rabbi Yossi? And the answer is, Kol Omer Dov b'Shem Omro Mevi Gu'ul Yolam Shenemar V'Tomer Esther Lamelech b'Shem Mordechai. So the Mishnah went out of its way to tell you who is the Tanakama, to identify the Tanakama. Initially, they didn't remember who the Tanakama was, and in some later period, that all of a sudden they remembered, oh, it was Rabbi Yossi. We got to add Rabbi Yossi to the Mishnah. Because now we'll know that what the Mishnah started with and presented was that of Rabbi Yossi, because we always have to say something in the name of the person who actually formulated that sentence, that rule. And that we derive from Mordechai and Esther, because you remember the story of Bigsan Viseresh, where Mordechai discovered the plot against the king, to poison the king, Achashverosh, and he notified it. And he told Esther, who was the Malka, to tell, to pass it on to the higher authorities. And she made sure to say it in the name of Mordechai. And as a result of that, Mordechai was able to be appreciated and appointed to replace Haman. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but that's in general. Okay. Now we have a Bryce. Tana Agra, a very strange name, Agra. Chamua, he's known as the father-in-law of Rabbi Abba, and he had a Bryce. Ofu gvina necholim bi'apikorin. So the word apikorin is miloshan hefker. Hefker means without any bounds, right? The opposite of hefker means this is mine. You can't enter into my area without my permission. There are bounds. But hefker means it's ownerless. And now the normal prohibitions that inhibit us from oaf and gvina, from basar and gvina, were lifted with regard to oaf and gvina. So, for example, if you eat meat, then you don't immediately eat cheese. There's going to be a whole process which has 3 different elements to it. You're going to have to wait a certain amount of time. You're going to have to clean off your hands. You're going to have to clean out your mouth, and so forth and so on. That's the whole sugya that we'll learn tomorrow. And those restrictions do not apply when you want to eat chicken after cheese. That's called be'afikor. So 2 of the requirements after eating meat before you eat cheese are, number 1, netilas yadayim. We're afraid that maybe some of the meat got stuck to your hands, and therefore you have to wash your hands. Then we're afraid that some of the meat might have gotten stuck in your mouth, and therefore you have to rinse out your mouth. Actually, let me be more precise about it. Kinuach doesn't mean rinsing your mouth. That's called hadacha, which we'll get to. Kinuach means, believe it or not, to take a piece of bread, and we're going to have all sorts of descriptions of that bread that qualifies, and chew it in your mouth. Today, people just drink a schnapps, but that's not accepted. I mean, you can drink schnapps. I have no objection, but that's not what the halacha requires. But all these requirements apply after you eat meat in order to allow you to eat cheese or dairy products. But with regard to eating chicken, we don't require this. You don't have to clean off your hands after the chicken, and you don't have to, chew on a piece of bread. And now we have a story that seems to contradict this. Because Rabbi Yitzchak Bereid Rabbi Shasha Ikla Lebei Rav Ashi, and Aisu Le Gvina V'Ochal, Aisu Le Bisra, and Ochal. Whoa. Look what happens. The Gemara is assuming that it doesn't matter what came first, where the cheese came before the meat because the meat came before the cheese. In all cases, we require number one, the tils yadayim, and number two, we require hadochas hapeh. I'm sorry, kinuach hapeh. And yet, to the surprise and perhaps to the disappointment of all those at the table, after eating cheese, he eats meat and he doesn't wash his hands. Amile, so they asked him, like Torah Hiva Luman and Itzara for Tani Agra Chamur de Rabbi Abba Ofu Gvina Nechal Bafikorin Ofu Gvina in Basar Gvina Lo. So you're talking about meat and cheese, then certainly in those cases the standards are very and the demands and conditions are very stiff, and you require both Natilas Yadayim as well as Kinuach HaPeh. And here, you ate cheese and you immediately, or maybe not immediately, but without washing your hands and without cleaning out your mouth, you went ahead and you ate meat. How could it be? If you feed cheese and meat at night, then you better wash your hands. But if it's during the daytime, just check your hands and you'll know. In fact, the poskim say that electric lights are just as good as natural daylight, and you don't have to wash your hands. Now, what about kinuach? Let me just see if by chance he comments on this. I don't know. I don't see any comment. Something is missing here because we said that you need kinuach. Maybe he did kinuach, because it says in the Gemara, "Ochav Moshe Yodeh." He did kinuach. That's what Tosfos and the Ritva say. He ate a solid food in between to wipe out his mouth, but he didn't wash his hands. Okay. Tanya, we learned to the Brisa. Okay, so this is an introduction to tomorrow's daf. Beit Shammai omrim mekaneach, Beis Hillel omrim meidiyah. So it seems at first glance that Beit Shammai holds that all you need to separate between cheese and meat is only kinuach, right? Which means that he eats this solid piece of bread, like to clean out his mouth, so to speak. Whereas Beit Shammai says, no. Forget about mekaneach, kinuach. It's hadocha. Hadocha means let him rinse out his mouth. So here we're on the top of Kuf Hey. If we assume that Beit Shammai omrim mekanech v'lo boy mediach, all you have to do is eat this piece of meat, piece of bread, and there's no need to wash your hands. Beis Hillel omrim mediach v'lo boy mekanech. On the other hand, Beis Hillel vote in favor of what they consider to be more effective, and that is to rinse your mouth with a liquid, and you don't have to wipe out your mouth by chewing the bread. Then we have a problem. Why? Because Ella ha diyomer abzera ain't kinuach ella bepas. Kinuach pe'ela bepas. Abzera requires kinuach. Does that mean that he holds like Beit Shammai? Keman ke Beit Shammai? We never passed like Beit Shammai against Beis Hillel. So why do Abzera have this very demanding stringency that after you eat the cheese, you've got to do kinuach hapeh? Was he pasking like Beit Shammai against Beis Hillel? Ella, so therefore the Gemara says, let's reinterpret the Brisa. Beit Shammai omrim mekanech v'lo boy meidiach, uBeis Hillel omrim af meidiach. Beis Hillel are always going to take a chumrah, and they're going to say that you require two things. Number one, you require kinuach, which is true even according to Beit Shammai. But Beit Shammai doesn't require hadacha. Beis Hill come along and they say, no, it's not enough to do kinuach and chew on a piece of bread, but rather you have to do hadacha. You have to rinse out your mouth with the liquid. That's not good either, says the Gemara, because Havile Mikule Beis Shammai Beis Chubei. So now we have to add a seventh case where Beis Shammai on Mekel against Beis Hill, because they only require kinuach, they don't require hadacha. Beis Hill require both. The listening Gabi Kule Beis Shammai Kule Beis Hill. Ella, and with this we'll wrap it up. Ella Beit Shammai Omrim Mekaneh v'hu adin l'meidiach. You have a choice. Either this or that. Beis Hill Omrim Meidiach v'hu adin mekaneh. Choice this way. There was never a machlokus between Beis Hill and Beit Shammai. Each one was emphasizing this, but the other way is also good. So all you need is either to rinse out your mouth or to chew on a piece of bread. So we're up to Gufa here on Daf Kuf He. And tomorrow we meet at noontime. Is that correct? Now, is there any interest in starting earlier? Let me know. I mean, earlier for me, unless it gets very complicated, if all things are equal, earlier for me is better. Okay, then. Have a great day.